Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today we're going to be showing you how to install the Titan disc brake assembly. But before we get into that, why don't we just check this out and make sure it's going to work for you. When it comes to braking performance, it's really hard to argue with a disc brake setup. You know, all the modern cars and vehicles are equipped with them, and there's a reason for it. You know, they just have better performance and better stopping power over the older style drum brakes. And that's really important. You know, when you're towing stuff around, you want to have something that is reliable. And when it comes to disc brakes, you know, compared to drums, there really isn't any disadvantages to a disc brake. You get better performance and less maintenance. And as we all know, you know, if we're being honest with ourselves, a lot of times the trailers get neglected. It's just kind of the way it is, you know. And with drum type brakes, it's something you have to kind of pay attention to. They're kind of a pain to work on. Sometimes you have to get under there and adjust them and everything else. And with the disc brake setup, you just don't really have to worry about it too much. You know, obviously every now and again, it's not a bad idea to check the condition of your rotors and obviously the thickness of your pads, but there's not any adjustments or anything like that. Obviously if the rotor gets warped or the pads are run down, you change them just like you would on your car. All right, so it makes it a little bit easier. And you know, like I talked about maintenance, you are going to have to still keep your hubs and your bearings lubricated. And since the hubs are kind of integrated in here, that's something you will have to do, but it does make it easier, the kit does, because it comes with a trailer buddy. So you pull this cap off and there's a grease fitting in there. You pump it full of grease until the little disc in here comes out flat and you're done. So it makes it super easy, super convenient. You don't have to take anything apart. And honestly, you don't even have to take the wheels off. Once the wheels are on there, this will poke through and you can get there super easy. I do know a lot of people are probably wondering, you know, is this setup going to work for your particular trailer? And unfortunately, the answer isn't super straightforward. There's a handful of things that are going to come into play when figuring that out. One of them being what your axles are rated for. You will need a 4-bolt flange on the back of your axle. That way you can bolt your bracket and all this stuff up to it. You know, your bolt pattern, your wheel size, and so on. Now, generally speaking, all those kind of go in hand with each other. So for example, on a 3,500 pound axle, chances are good you're going to have all that stuff and it's going to match up. But there is some oddball stuff out there. So something you want to pay attention to and check everything before you pick these up. That way you make sure you get the right stuff the first time. And then, you know, there's several different ways you can actually use these too. So one of them will be you can add it or even upgrade from a drum brake setup. This kit can also be a good direct replacement or a small upgrade to the disc brake setup that you might already have on your trailer. So that's exactly what we're doing today on our trailer. It already has disc brakes. Now granted, they're aged. On the back side, the rotor feels like it's starting to warp a little bit and kind of get grooved. The pads are about half-life, and the main reason we're doing this even is inside of here we have some water, so our seals failed and the bearings are shot more or less. And so because of all those things combined while we're in here, it just kind of makes sense to replace everything, you know, have a good start. And get ourselves going on the road again with the confidence knowing that our brake setup is proper. With that said, our setup today was pretty easy. You know, is essentially everything just kind of bolted right up, and that probably won't be the case for a lot of people. I feel like most people will be either adding these or probably upgrading from a drum brake. And I'm going to do my best here to think of everything you're going to need to make these work properly. All right, so let's say if you have drum brakes, for example, the first thing you need to do is make sure your actuator is capable of producing enough pressure, because disc brakes require a higher pressure to operate properly than drum brakes do. So you want to make sure your actuator is rated for a 1,500 PSI. If it's not, usually there's a tag or something on it you can find. If not, you know, there's plenty of actuators available right here. And chances are really good too. You're probably going to want to pick up some actual rubber brake hoses. A lot of times the drum brakes, you'll see just the hard lines that thread right into them. Not ideal for a disc brake setup like this. At least I don't think I've ever seen one set up like that. So you'll probably need some rubber hoses too that you can run off of your existing hard lines. That way you can actually thread them into your caliper here. And honestly, I'm trying to think what else you might need that might be about it. You know, obviously it's hard to say depending on your current situation. If your hardware and your nuts and bolts are going to kind of transfer over, I would say it's chances are pretty good they will, but something to think about as well whenever you're doing a change like this. Then obviously you're going to want some grease to pack your bearings and that type of thing. You know, if you have a boat trailer like we do, make sure you use the marine grease and the appropriate type of grease. That way everything will stay lubricated and working properly. Now let's say if you're adding these, okay, so you don't have any brakes at all, it's going to be a little bit more work. It's going to be a fairly big job. You know, like I said, you want to make sure your axles have those 4-bolt flanges on it. That way this will bolt up. You'll need this kit and a disc brake line kit. So I believe we carry several of them, several different types that'll have the hoses, the hard lines, and everything to run all that stuff up to the front. And then obviously you'll need your surge brake actuator as well. That'll tie into the front of your trailer. And you need to make sure your trailer is compatible with one of those to begin with. Usually they kind of slide into the front of the trailer there. So a lot of stuff to think about. And like I said, you know, I'm not trying to ramble. I'm just trying to think of everything that you would want to check. That way you can make sure all this stuff will work for you. Other than that though, pretty straightforward stuff. You know, actually it's actually a pretty nice kit. You know, it reminds me of something you'd see on a newer automobile. The rotor does have what's called, I believe it's called a dacrymate finish, and it's kind of this thick coating on here. And what this is supposed to do is, you know, help prevent corrosion and things of that nature. Now, granted, whenever the brakes are being applied, it'll wear off, you know, on the contact point there and be just metal, but the rest of it will still have this coating. And so that'll be a little more beneficial for everyone really, but particularly boat trailers like we got today, constantly in and out of the water. So it should hold up a little bit better. I'd imagine it's better than nothing. I believe they make stainless steel versions as well. So if you're going into salt water or anything, that's always another option as well. And the rotors are actually vented. So up top here, you can see there's little vents, and what happens whenever the wheel's turning, you know, that vents heat out of the rotor, and that's one thing that just kills brakes is heat, kills the braking performance. So keeping these a little bit cooler will help keep the performance up. And even the pads, really thick pads, they have a nice coating on them as well, and they're a ceramic type pad, so kind of the better pads that are available. They help eliminate brake dust and things like that, and they just work a little bit better. So you know, it's a nice kit. Honestly, it'll kind of help bring your trailer and your braking performance into the modern era. You know, if you got something that stops really well, your trailer does, you don't have to rely on your truck or your tow vehicle to do all the work too. So there's a benefit there as well. You know, if you're really matting on the brakes to get everything to slow down, it'll ease up. Putting these on your trailer will ease up on the truck some too. So just make life a little bit more enjoyable and a little bit safer too, decreasing your stopping distance and everything else like that. As far as the install goes, kind of like we talked about earlier, it's probably going to be a little bit different for a lot of people, but the gist of it is the same. You know, you'll take off what you got, bolt up your brackets, pack the bearings, put the hub and rotor on, and bolt up your caliper And of course, you'll have to figure out your brake lines and bleed them out and everything. So hopefully when we do ours, it'll at least, at the very least, give you some guidance and some direction to get yours done. But speaking of that, why don't we go ahead and put this one on together now. To begin your installation, first things first, you want to get your trailer jacked up in the air, you know, and do it safely, use jack stands and all the proper equipment, and then get the wheels removed. And from there, it's just going to depend on what you're kind of doing with this kit. You know, if you're going to be adding brakes, then obviously there won't be much to remove. You'll just need to get it kind of down to the bare spindle, so you'll pull your wheel hub off, and everyone's going to be set up a little bit different, but the idea is the same. If you're going to be upgrading from drum brakes, that whole drum assembly will have to come off, and there will be several bolts and stuff that you have to take off there. Since we already have this and we're just upgrading to these new ones, I'm going to pull off our caliper, our bracket, and our hub and rotor assembly. So everything's pretty straightforward. I'll go ahead and get all this stuff out of the way, and we'll show you how to set up the new assembly. So I got everything taken apart, just down to our bare spindle here, cleaned everything up, and now we can install our plate here, our bracket for our caliper. And what you're going to do is take this, and then the existing hardware that I pulled out, that's what I'm using, just a bolt, and a split lock washer and a nut. I'm going to get all these started, and then we can come back and tighten them down. Whenever you are tightening these down, I like to kind of do it in an X pattern. That way it'll just kind of help draw everything together a little more evenly. Now we can grab our hub and rotor assembly and start to pack the bearings. That way we can put the back bearing in and the seal on. Use the appropriate grease. So for example, we have a boat trailer, so I'm going to be using marine grade grease, and I just like to put a little bit in there to start with. Just kind of coat everything. And to pack a bearing, you can do it several different ways. They make tools that you put the bearing in and push down on. There's a bunch of different tools kind of like that. Or you can do things the old way and just use your hand. So that's what I'm going to do. Put a big blob of grease in your hand, and then take the back bearing, this bigger one, and what we're going to do, you can see the roller bearings in there, right? And we want to smash grease in between them. That way the grease will come out of this edge. And you want that grease to get forced in between those and come out of this edge. So take a little bit of grease from your blob there, and what you're going to do is essentially just kind of roll that bearing into the grease. And I don't know if we can able to pick it up, but you can kind of see that grease started to go in through the bearing and out through the gap. And we want to do that all the way around, and you really can't do it too much, you know what I mean? You're not going to mess the bearing up by packing too much grease in it. So you want to make sure this is done really well. So I'm just going to continue to work my way around and really be sure that all that grease got packed in there sufficiently. That way we don't burn our bearing up or cause premature failure here. So I'm going to keep working that around for another minute or so, and then I'll do the smaller bearing while my hands are dirty. That'll be for the front. And honestly, I mean, at this point too, if you're doing a whole kit or whatever the case may be, if you got your hands all messy like this, it might not be bad just to pack all of them right now, and then you can just set them off to the side on a paper towel or something. Don't put them down where it's super dirty and pick up a bunch of junk. But yep, I'll do the front one, and then we'll show you how to set the rest of it up. So I got our bearing packed, and then You can put a very thin layer around the outside here and around your seal. I like to, at least. Just kind of helps it driving easier. But take the bearing, drop that in, make sure it's sitting how you want it. And then our seal here, I'll wipe my hands clean. Our seal, there's a couple ways you can do this as well. They make seal drivers and fancy tools that you can use to get this in, or what we're gonna do is just a small block of wood and a rubber mallet. Really with this, you just wanna make sure that it drives down evenly and obviously goes all the way down. So I'll try to start this and then simply just start to tap it, and after every few taps, examine it, see if you need to make an adjustment. Once it's tapped on in, this is what it's going to look like. Take our assembly, and I put some grease on the spindle too, just to help kind of keep everything lubricated. You're gonna push that straight on, and then with your front bearing packed, slide that in, and then you can take the washer, put that on, and then the spindle nut. I try to kind of hold everything together here, so greasy it's hard to hold on to here. So when you put this nut on, what I like to do is just tighten it all the way down by hand, and then take a pair of ice or a pair of clamps like this and snug it up as hard as you can. And then once it's all the way snug, you can back it off. Some people just do like half a turn, other people break it loose and then just literally take it by hand and tighten it until it touches. Either way, you just want to make sure the preload's right. It's snug fit in there, everything spins fine, and everything else. So once that's set, we can grab the rest of our hardware and get it wrapped up. So once you have that preload set, you know, you can cap everything off. There's a little cap that goes over the nut, and then you can put your cotter pin in there to prevent it from backing off. And some spindles are set up differently. You know, there's a handful of different styles of this, but the idea is the same. Get your nut tight how you want it, and then put the rest of the stuff on there so it don't back off, essentially. And then this kit does come with these quick lube type deals here, these caps. So we can pop these on, just try to hold them straight. And actually what I'll do, I'm just gonna put a little bit of grease around there too. That might make it slide in a little bit easier instead of just being dry. And again with my rubber mallet, so tap that in. Sometimes these are kind of tricky to get going, so just be patient, kind of work your way around it here. Just keep tapping it until it is seated. And for now, just to keep everything together, eventually when we're all done, we'll come back and grease these, but just to keep everything together, I'll pop my cap on as well. So now what I'm going to do is, since we already have brake lines ran, since our setup already was a disc brake setup, I'm going to unthread our line here and put it into the caliper before we bolt it on. Because if you bolt it on, then you try to tighten this down, it just wants to coil around and snake around, and you know, it's just easier to do it this way. So I broke that loose with these. If you have a line wrench like this, that's ideal because it gets more contact there. You don't strip anything out. So I'm gonna try to do this somewhat quickly so I don't get brake fluid everywhere. It's like I said, it's easier just to turn this instead of the line getting all kinked up and everything. Try not to let any fluid, if you're doing it like I am, try not to let any fluid get on the pad, so. And I'll just tighten this back down. I'll grab a towel and clean up what little fluid did end up leaking out here. With the line all tightened down, cleaned up, set our piece on, and then take the included bolts. And sometimes these are kind of a pain to line up, but we're trying to line it up with our bracket. Get them both started hand tight. These will be pretty tight. Like you'll get a turn or so on it. That's because they already come with the Loctite there, I believe it is. So make sure you get as much as you can because you don't want to cross thread these, obviously. These feel pretty good. I'm going to come back with socket and start to snug them up. You'll feel a little resistance when you turn these. If they're really, really tight, don't force it. You know, back them out and try to restart them. You might have it in crooked or something like that, but these feel good, so I'll go ahead and get these rained down. Now we're ready to grease everything. So there's a fitting right there you can put your gun on, and these have a spring in it, and you want to grease that until this comes out pretty much flush, and we'll see a little bit of grease kind of get past here. That's when we want to stop. So we'll plug that in. So we'll keep pumping that. And it'll take quite a bit. And I kind of made a mess in there. So hopefully we can see this still. Pump that. See, this thing's moving out now. Right about there is good. It starts to sit flush. We got a little grease coming out of the side ring there. So, you know, this one's properly lubricated. Go ahead and just kind of clean that stuff out of there. And then we can take our cap and put that on. So once you have all of your assemblies installed and greased and everything, now you want to bleed the brakes. That way, since we opened up our line system, air is now entered. So we have up front, got our reservoir filled up, and we'll get to that in just a moment, show you what's going on up there. But you want to be working on the fitting that's up top here, the one that's highest. And you also want to position your trailer in a way to where the reservoir is sitting up higher than this. That way all the air can come out, you know. So with that said, we're going to pump up our actuator up front there, and you're going to pump it a few times. Keep an eye on the fluid level, make sure it's full. Once you kind of start to feel some resistance, you can hold it. So you want to hold that down, and while you're holding it, then you can take a line wrench. This is a 5/16, just crack this open. So I heard some air come out, and we got a little bit of fluid, so not a whole lot. So we're just going to pump it again and pump it up a few times until now we feel the resistance. We'll hold it, open it up again, and when that happens, we'll probably get, you know, kind of spit. You'll hear some air coming out and see bubbles and stuff, and we just want to continue to do that until we have a good solid stream of brake fluid. So if you want to hold it down, I'll crack it open again. See, this time it was a little bit better, but it was still kind of spitting. So we'll continue to do this probably 3-4 more times until we feel confident that this is good. And then we'll do that for the rest of our assemblies. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Titan disc brake assembly.